Hello, I'm Derek Fildebrandt. You're watching The Pipeline on January 5th, 2021. I'm joined today by Corey Morgan, podcast editor and columnist with the Western Standard. G'day, Corey.
Good afternoon.
I don't know if it's after. Well, it's 8 minutes into afternoon, I guess. Yeah.
And
Dave Naylor, news editor of the Western Standard. G'day, Dave.
G'day, Derek. Still morning for me out here in soggy Vancouver.
Indeed. Well, today we're picking up where we left off yesterday. The Great Snowbird Scandal of 2021, as we are dubbing it now, continues to rage. There was a ministerial resignation yesterday. Kenny fired his chief of staff and gave a small slap on the wrist to some of his vacationing Tories, despite the government's own lockdown. We're going to talk about the political fallout of it. Have the heads that have been served up and wrist slaps, are they enough to appease the anger of Albertans right now? And what is going to be the long-term fallout of this? We're going to discuss it. We're going to discuss, though, I think very importantly, did Jason Kenney really not know about this as he claims? We've got a bit to say about it, and we've got some documents we're going to share with you today. And as well, a Black Lives Matter activist and candidate for city council in Edmonton, cheering the death of a murdered Calgary police officer. We'll talk about that, an exclusive story from Dave Naylor at the Western Standard. So let's hop into it, again, with the Great Snowbird Scandal of 2021. We're jumping back in where we left off yesterday. Dave, Kenny accepting the resignation of Tracy Allard from cabinet, firing his chief of staff, Jamie Huckabee, and then giving pretty minor slaps on the wrist to the other 6 UCP MLAs, and then I think no sanction at all towards the press secretaries. Dave, you've been closely following the fallout of this. Is it looking like this is going to be enough to satisfy the bloodlust of angry Albertans right now, or do you think there's more to come?
Well, I don't think it's anywhere near close enough to satisfy the bloodlust, Derek. All the political columnists and all the major mainstream media say it isn't. Not that they should be listened to, but and certainly the phone calls and the emails and text messages that I'm getting from Wild Rose supporters, they're just still livid. And now we're getting to the point in the story where people are coming forward and saying, "Hey, did you know this person was there?" And "Hey, did you know that press secretary was out of the province over here?" So these are all the leads that we're following up as quickly as we can, but still nowhere near the end of the story. And I think, as you hinted at there, Derek, the question now becomes, what did the premier know, and when did he know it?
Indeed. Corey, do you think, perhaps this would have gone down better if Kenny had made these actions when he held his now widely lamented press conference January 1st. He acted instead yesterday, January 4th, when the scandal seems to have gotten out of control. Do you think this is going to be enough, or do you think it'll be pretty much died down by this time next week?
I honestly don't know. I don't know how much more he can do. Well, we know things that people are calling for. Some are calling for Kenny to resign. Well, it's not going to happen. And the NDP is going to call for Kenny to resign every week over everything. It doesn't really matter anyway. Can he really kick 6 members totally out of caucus? I know he's kicked members out of caucus before, and for what things that perhaps could be considered lesser offenses than this. But losing half a dozen, and it's playing catch up, right? Like he's in a terrible position. He's put himself into it. Friday, he put out that conference and did nothing. But it also does tell me, I guess it's mixed. Either maybe it's a bit of both. He didn't realize just how bad this is, which again shows some of the disconnect they have with the mindset of grassroots and populist type of supporters. And also he didn't know how many guys were still out of the country. And perhaps you shouldn't hold a conference until you've had a head count on every one of them, because that's part of what killed him too. He thought, I could do this on a New Year's Day, get it out, put it to bed, people will forget about it. But unfortunately, over the next 2 days, more of them got exposed, which just poured gasoline on the fire, and then he was forced to do something by Monday. What he'll be able to do, though, to put it out is broken trust. I don't think any more punishment is going to change it. The only thing he can hope for is one of two things. One is something big and coming and pushing it down the news cycle for him, which is out of his control. And the other thing is just time. You've broken trust, and it's going to take time to regain it if you can.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I'm not sure that more heads will solve it at this point. And while people might say that they should all be tossed, you can offer up the heads of maybe one out of caucus, maybe two, but it is tough to fire 7 or more members of your caucus. And he didn't really know, apparently, how many there were, although I think for the backbenchers, they didn't know, but I have a pretty good feeling they knew how many members of cabinet were out of the country. And I'm not sure that the public does yet. I have a feeling it was not just Tracy Allard, even though she's the one who's paid the price so far. But I think where this story is going now is not just what those guys did and Kenny's reaction to it. I think it's Jason Kenney's statements about what he knew and when he knew it. Dave, this is something you've had some breaking stories on. You've been working, I think, 14-hour days in our media sweatshop here. Why don't you tell us where we're at with the memo and some of the revelations we've had about when he knew and when he knew it?
Yeah, Derek, what happens when a cabinet minister goes on holiday is they fill in basically a vacation request form, which they give to their chief of staff. The cabinet minister's chief of staff then gives it to the premier's office. And it's not just a case of, okay, Minister A is going on holiday. They have to figure out who's going to cover for Minister A. So they have to give Minister A's responsibility to Minister X. So it's not just a case of rubber stamping. Now, we've talked to a senior Tory party insider, a former Tory cabinet minister and a confidant of the Premier Jason Kenney. And he says it's, quote, inconceivable, unquote, that the Premier did not know that one of his cabinet ministers, had been gone for a month. And he points out the fact that, Kenney is such a hands-on guy, a hands-on command and control, as he put it, very much like Stephen Harper used to be with his prime minister's office. And he just points out the fact that there's no way Kenney didn't know. When we published this exclusive story last night on the Western Standard, Derek, we got an email from the Premier's office within 5 minutes of it going up.
When's the last time we did that?
Holy cow, we can't even get a question in at one of their press conferences. But, on the bright side, it shows they're reading us and quite closely. And that press conference was just a reaffirmation saying, look, that memo came into the Premier's office, but there's no way it got to Kenney's hands. The Premier did not see it.
Well, let's kind of go into that for a second here. We've got we've got this memo. We're gonna pull it up here in a second. But we've got this memo from Tracy Allard, the now former minister, to Jason Kenney, and you can all see it here. Reads, please be advised that I will be on personal time December 29th, 2020 until January 10th, 2021 inclusive. Rick McIver will take over, yada, yada, yada. That's from Tracy Allard, you can see in the upper left, to the Honorable Jason Kenney, Premier, and copying Jamie Huckabee, Chief of Staff, as well as Rick McIver and the Chief of Staff to Allard. Now, as you've said, Dave, once we put that up, a spokesman for Jason Kenney says, oh, he didn't read it. Now, let's just put this in context. Tracy Allard was the chairwoman of the government's COVID-19 Emergency Response Committee, which is the nexus of the entire government right now. This is the most important cabinet committee around. And Jason Kenney is a well-known workaholic. Even his critics admit that he's a hard worker and he is a control freak. He has his hands on everything. He knows what every minister is doing. And we are supposed to believe that the Premier of Alberta during a lockdown did not read a memo from the chair of the COVID-19 Emergency Response Committee informing him that she would be away. We are supposed to believe that he didn't read this. I mean, we weren't in the room. So I suppose it is theoretically possible. Corey, give us the over-under on what are the chances are that Jason Kenney did not really read this?
I think it's extremely unlikely that he didn't read it. I mean, to give a little bit of benefit of the doubt, he may have read it, though, and thought, okay, she's going to visit her sister in Saskatchewan or Edmonton or something, and took the presumption that she'd be smart enough not to leave the country at a time like this. I mean, there is a little bit of that wondering, but again, he's on top. You have to wear it. So you can't apparently assume that your caucus is all smart enough not to step into this mire, because they did. And they shouldn't have had to have been instructed not to, but the mess is all now on his lap. He may have read it. I'm sure he probably did read it. I'll just try to be a little kind and think maybe he just assumed, though, that it meant she was taking a break and not that she'd be leaving the country.
Yeah.
At the height of the vaccine rollout.
And she is the minister in charge of it. Now, what he said is when he held his, widely panned press conference of January 1st, he said, we've got the actual wording here. We've got it elsewhere. But he said, I became aware of this on the 29th of December. This memo is dated the 13th of December. That's a fair bit of time. And he also said during that press conference, we have had virtual cabinet meetings. So she's been, and he meant to say, she's been working. It's not like she wasn't actually doing anything while she was on vacation. She'd been working. We had virtual cabinet meetings. So you had these long virtual cabinet meetings, and it never came up that she was about 2 hemispheres over. That is increasingly difficult to believe. And again, it's not just the actions of the scandal here, it's the cover-up of it. It's is he telling the truth of it to try and extract himself from any blame?
Maybe you've got to wonder what Allard was using as a green screen, right? Maybe she's got a snowbound Grand Prairie on it, as opposed to her lying on the beach. But I think Kenney's blundered this from the beginning. I think Corey hinted about that. That Friday performance was a fiasco, and he's now into day 4 or 5 of radio silence. So he's getting some bad advice. I'm not sure who's left to give him advice, as he fired his chief of staff, but he's getting some bad advice, and now. That's the worst thing you can do, because then you got the media scurrying around for stories.
Well, let's talk about the chief of staff more. I suppose it's theoretically possible not to know where a minister is, even if you're on conference calls with her, and she is now essentially the most important minister in the government right now, chairing the COVID-19 Emergency Response Committee. Well, let's grant him that. But let's talk about the chief of staff. Now, when I was in politics, I had a chief of staff. And I can tell you, I know if they're taking a piss. I know where they are at all times. There is no one more important in your organization. And I was leading a pretty small political party. I was not the premier of Alberta. So my chief of staff, as important as that person was a hell of a lot less important than the chief of staff to the premier of a province, a major province. You know where your chief of staff is at all times. Now, Jason Kenney said, I guess is trying to have us believe that he did not know where his chief of staff was for weeks on end while they were overseas during one of the biggest crises a government can face. Dave, you spoke to someone last night who has something to say about that. They spoke on condition of anonymity. Why don't you run us through what the likelihood is that Jason Kenney was telling the truth about not knowing where his chief of staff was?
Well, it's like you say, it's the chief of staff is your right arm. It's the right arm of the cabinet minister. He's the one that gets him to all the appointments. He's the one that tells him where he's going. He's the one that tells him who he's speaking to. He's the one that buttons up his tie and makes sure he's looking okay before he goes to before he goes in front of the press. So, to claim that he didn't know his chief of staff was in the United Kingdom, as our force says, is inconceivable.
Well, let's get into that a bit more here. So you spoke to a senior. He was a former senior minister, conservative minister, and he is a close confidant of Jason Kenney. We can tell you, people, this is not Thomas Lukaszuk, but this former minister and close confidant of Jason Kenney spoke on condition of anonymity. He says, when you go away, every minister fills out a form. The form goes to the minister's chief of staff, then to the premier. It is, quote, inconceivable that Kenney wouldn't know Allard was traveling. Well, when people close to you start speaking to the media, that's probably good reason to be worried. Corey, is this a sign that the wheels might be falling off a bit here?
Well, I imagine there's a lot of turmoil going on inside right now. I mean, everybody's scrambling. They want to save their own butts. They're pointing fingers, But again, I think what it all comes down to, I mean, Kenney is a smart guy. Nobody could deny that. It shows that disconnect. I mean, with the chief of staff, I don't recall if Kenney ever directly said he didn't know about where Huckabee was. I think he's been kind of silent on that one because it's just too much to believe that, as you said, his right-hand man has been gone, off the continent, and he wouldn't know about it. What it does say, though, is they really didn't realize just how profoundly bad these actions were. They didn't realize how it was going to resonate with Albertans. That's a sign of the elitism that you get stuck with, as they say, dome disease or Ottawa syndrome for the federal ones and things like that. But they don't even understand how they've offended everybody yet. Now that it's really blowing up in their face, they're getting a really good understanding of it. But I think the reason they didn't try to cover that earlier is because they didn't even realize they were doing something wrong. And that's kind of a whole different level of disturbing.
Now, what's making it worse, Derek, at this moment is the federal Liberals, right? Everybody's bogeyman in the West. And their MPs who have admitted that they traveled are voluntarily stepping down. Even before it was made public, they're coming forward and saying, I visited this sick grandmother, I visited this person, and I'm stepping down from my role as parliamentary secretary to this, that, and the other. They're doing it voluntarily.
They're doing it in far worse, less terrible circumstances.
Oh, exactly.
I thought some of the resignations were unnecessary. I mean, one went to a memorial service or funeral in Washington State. Another one went to see a dying relative in Delaware. I'm not terribly outraged about that.
No, and the thing is, they admitted it voluntarily, and they took their job cuts voluntarily. And the Prime Minister came out this morning, first time he's been seen in ages, outside Rideau Cottage, and he scolded politicians. You shouldn't be traveling at this time of year. So when the Liberals look smarter than the UCP does, it's a big public relations image. This confidant of Premier Kenney's last night described it as like the dying days of Alison Redford's premiership. So, I'm not sure if Kenney's gone into the bunker yet beneath the dome, but it's a pretty bleak for him at the moment. And I'm like Corey, I really don't know what he does to try and get out of it.
Indeed. Okay, well, let's move on. Dave, you're just a bloody machine. Breaking news stories. The latest is a Black Lives Matter activist and defund the police guy and candidate for Edmonton City Council. Why don't you tell us what's going on with this?
Oh, Derek, reporters aren't supposed to get personally involved in their stories, but I just found this disgusting. It made me sick to my stomach. This is a gentleman called Abdul Hakim Dalal. He's a Edmonton community activist. He calls himself a community activist, and he's a politician up there. He tried to run for the NDP in the last federal election, but didn't make it through the nomination process. He's now said he's running in Ward 7 in the election, and he celebrated the death today of Calgary Police Sergeant Andrew Harnett, who was killed in that horrible hit and run. and he was responding to a tweet about Prime Minister Trudeau not publicly acknowledging the fact that Harnett had fallen in the line of duty, which the Prime Minister has done on every time a soldier or usually another police officer does fall in the line of duty. And Dalal came out and answered that tweet by saying, quote, "'cause he was a corrupted police officer," unquote. And then he followed it up with 5 smiley emojis. No matter what side of the argument you're on, there's no excuse for that. This is a gentleman who has repeatedly said he will defund the Edmonton Police Service if he gets elected, and has been quoted several times on Black Lives Matter social media articles up in Edmonton. And I debated with him myself. I mean, this guy's certainly on the fringe, Derek. I debated with myself whether or not to write the story, but within a couple minutes of writing it, I'd heard from 2 police officers and 1 Edmonton politician who basically said, "Thanks for exposing this guy. We need to know what kind of people are running for office." So even the Black Lives Matter people will not be happy about this focusing a spotlight on them.
Corey, how do you think the whole BLM defund the police crowd will have to respond to this?
I don't know. To be honest, if you look at their history, this is typical of them. This is not like I'm tired of people treating that group of extremists with kid gloves. There are a lot of quotes, extremism, hatred, promotion of violence that have come from Black Lives Matter for years, and it does hit the news a little bit. Just in this case, it's much closer to home, and I mean, just so vile as to dance on the grave of an officer who's recently died in the line of duty. I don't think they'll condemn him. They might just distance themselves a little from this guy, but this isn't new out of these people. And I should watch the "these people" statement. The extreme activist element of that. No. And it's just sickening. I'm very happy Dave called him out, and I think I want to write on this further because Black Lives Matter. I mean, people are concerned. There's real issues. There's certainly some police cultural issues to work on. When people marched en masse, when things were first happening, a lot of moderate people were on the streets with concerns. But when the mainstream and the moderate people move aside, that extreme element of BLM leadership remains. And it's just over and over again. And again, these guys have to be called out, and in my view, disbanded or at least sidelined as an extremist band of nutcases. And if somebody wants to put together a rational police reform type of group or addressing systemic racism, assuming it is there, it's time for a new one, because BLM is just garbage.
Yeah. I want to point out, Derek, that at this very second, thousands of Calgarians are lining the route along Memorial Drive and into Forest Lawn for a funeral, not a funeral procession, but the procession of Sergeant Harnett's body from the medical examiner's office to the funeral home in Forest Lawn. This has hit a chord of sadness in Calgary. It's the first police officer to die in the line of duty for 20 years. And this, if he was trying to make a point, it certainly backfired in his face, I think.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. It really is sad. The BLM defund the police movement. I guess those two movements have kind of merged into one, more or less. It's unfortunate because it takes away from the need for real police reform. We've seen video of absolute goons of police officers in Gatineau violently forcing their way into a home without a warrant, as far as we know, in Gatineau, Quebec, and violently dragging a man out because he was one of 6 people having supper on New Year's Eve. Absolute goonery. Now, these cops are acting under the orders of the politicians, and the politicians are ultimately responsible. But there is, we do have a problem with police. We saw the 2 Keystone cops in Calgary fail miserably to take a man down for playing hockey, threatened to fucking tase him. The absolute gong show of that. We do have a problem with some adrenaline junkie cops going around demanding people respect their authority. And there is a need for reform. and police to know that it's their job to keep the peace, not to enforce government proclamations. So there's a need for this, but it gets really hard to advocate reasonable police reform when we've got these people coming out screaming defund the police, and the most extreme elements of them, not all of them, I think it's fair to say, but the more extreme elements of them cheering the murder of police officers. So, for all of you watching, members and non-members, we need your help. We are going into the field today. We have contracted Main Street Research, one of the most prestigious and credible polling firms in Canada, to do a poll of how Albertans feel right now. We want a snapshot of how Albertans feel about this, what they think is the appropriate reaction. We want to know, do Albertans think that the resignation of a single minister and a chief of staff is enough, or does there need to be more? We want to know, has this affected how Albertans intend to vote? Are they just gonna kind of get over this, or are they are Albertans feeling now that they're going to start shifting how they're going to vote? We don't know that yet. We need good, hard, scientific data on it, and we have contracted Main Street Research just an hour ago, but it's an expensive poll, and I don't want to bankrupt the Western Standard to do it. And I hope all of you feel the same way. So please help us crowdsource this. Go the link below, westernstandardonline.com/donate-poll/. I'm going to put that in the comments. You can follow that link and make a donation to help us crowdsource this in a way that's not going to bankrupt the Western Standard. There's a very important poll right now. We're going to poll on some other issues. We're going to poll on how people feel right now about things like Alberta independence or Western independence, questions that the mainstream media don't often ask too often or ask very fairly. We're going to be asking about a lot of these important questions that get ignored by the mainstream media. So please kick in, give what you can. Those of you who are already members of the Western Standard, thank you very much for your support. If you're not yet a member, please go to westernstandardonline.com, click on membership, sign up. The good folks of the Western Standard here are working in a media sweatshop. We pay them very little, and they are working ridiculous hours right now, breaking stories ahead of much of the rest of the mainstream media. So if you can, please please do what you can to contribute, become a member, and also help us crowdsource this poll to get some important information on how Albertans are really feeling right now. But with that, we're going to wrap up today's show. We thank you all very much for joining, and especially to Dave and Corey for your contributions today. Thank you very much.
Hey, this was fun, Derek. If the news continues, we should do it again tomorrow.
And we just might. Okay, thank you all very much. Stay safe and have a good vacation.